All righty. So I want to talk about a special peptide today. This one's called 5-amino 1-MQ. This one's going to be best looked at as a stack. And so this is one of those plateau breakers. This is for people who maybe don't get fantastic success with GLP-1, GLP-3s, or they want to stack something on top, or they don't want to use the GLP-1s, GLP-3s. The 5-amino, so what it basically does is, what's the easiest way to explain it, this is especially beneficial for endomorphs. So if you're one of those people who diets pretty well, like not perfect, but pretty well, and you exercise and you're still not losing fat, what you have to recognize is that this is also, again, why it's important to realize the body doesn't run on calories and it runs on biochemistry. So imagine, this isn't how it works, but go with me. Imagine there's a switch, right? And it says, hey, when fuel comes in, you should either store it as fat or use it as energy. Okay, well, some people, their switch kind of leans more store it as fat all the time. Some people, that tends a little bit leans over, use it as energy more. So the people who just generally have a harder time losing fat, even if they're doing the right things, this is a fantastic option. Because what ends up happening is it kind of push that switch kind of back over towards the use fat as energy side of it. And so your body will start utilizing instead of storing energy for fat. So it's a fantastic option. It's not a stimulant. It doesn't get you all jittery or anything like that. It doesn't affect hormonal axes that much. It really works kind of in the mitochondrial piece of the body, kind of saying, hey, how are we going to make energy? So again, this is why it's important. Again, it doesn't run on calories. It runs on adenosine triphosphate. So when your body's making ATP, and it's like, hey, how should we make it? Your body goes, hey, why don't you use some of the fat you've stored? And it's like, okay, great. And so it'll start burning, it starts utilizing fat as a fuel source. And so it helps break through plateaus. It helps move things out a little bit better. And it's also a little bit more beneficial all the way around. So we've had some people who are a little bit more fatigued as they're cutting back on their carbohydrates and things like that. This helps with that, but this is also one of those great options for people who have done a GLP-1 or a GLP-3, and they've had some success, but maybe a little bit slower than everybody expected. Or it works just like it should. They've lost 15, 20 pounds, but they've got more visceral fat. They've got more adipose tissue that they can still lose, and they kind of slow down in the process. This is a great addition for anybody to use. This is also really well stacked with things like NAD and MOTS-c. There's a blend called the triple helix that is really, really good because it has NAD, it has MOTS-c, and it has the 5-amino in it as well. So those options would be really, really good. When we're starting to use peptides, this is the big thing that everybody kind of needs to know. When you're using peptides, not every peptide is right for every person. Not every dose is right for every person. So if you're really going to start playing with peptides, I would highly recommend that you work with somebody who can kind of walk you through some of this stuff because, and I use this example all the time with like Retta. I had a patient he's 6'4", he's 240, and he was using 7 units while his wife, who's 5'5", 5'6", 135, was using 15 units. And so figuring out your specific dose for what you're trying to do is really important. And so make sure you're working with somebody who can kind of walk you through how they're all doing for that. Now, again, if you're going to use this as a benefit, as a build on top of something like retatrutide or semaglutide or one of the GLP-1s, you've got to make extra sure that you're feeding your body. We don't want the body to tear apart muscle tissue and stuff like that. So make sure your minerals are up, specific, like all of your minerals, all the good ones, not just magnesium, and potassium, but selenium and molybdenum and boron and all of them. Make sure those are up. Make sure you're getting your amino acids in. Make sure your androgens are where they're supposed to be. So your testosterone levels, your growth hormone. Make sure you're exercising and moving around. And so those are going to be really, really beneficial. If you're using any of the growth hormone adjuncts, whether if you're younger and trying to get taller, if you're old, if you're just trying to regenerate muscle tissue or whatever you're trying to do with the growth hormones, make sure you're cycling those, but those you want to take at different times. So this is one of those things that as you start, if you use a peptide, you guys can usually kind of generate the information on your own, kind of pull that up. But if you're going to start stacking these things, if you're going to start using it higher levels, I would highly recommend that you work with somebody who understands how those things are going to go through. And here's the deal. Just like I said earlier, a lot of people are going to use different dosage levels, different needs, depending on what your diet is, depending on what your exercise levels are, how much you're sleeping, how much water you're getting in. And so it would be very beneficial as you start working with somebody to get through and be like, okay, hey, how'd you feel? Oh, I was a little bit nauseous. All right, take, whatever, Tudco, more methylated B6 to allow more bile function to break down the fat faster so we can get into this, we can get through the system. There's a lot of that that's also pretty important. So once you can find kind of your maintenance and kind of come down, you're good. But putting these things together is, I would recommend that you work, again, with somebody who kind of can help walk through this. Now, I've worked with trainers who know what they're doing. I've worked with, physiology guys who know what they're doing, and there are a couple of medical docs who know what they're doing as well. But just make sure that if you're going to do this, you do it with somebody who knows what they're doing, or can at least kind of help you navigate through some of this new stuff. So this 5-amino one is great. I prefer it with things like NAD and MOTC as that triple helix is a great option. You can use it on its own. One of the other benefits is the SS31 peptide, which helps regenerate and heal mitochondrial function. Because a lot of times, again, when we're talking about energy production, when we're talking about utilization of fat or sugars or ketones or lactate to produce your ATP, you've got to kind of understand how the chemistry is flowing through. So the SS31 helps to kind of regenerate and heal mitochondria and kind of helps spruce them up and give them some of the nutrients that they need to function. So again, a lot of energy production, the vast majority of energy production is done in your mitochondria. Now, obviously, the Cori cycles outside of that, and cytoplasmic ATP production and like blood cells is outside of that. But the vast majority of your energy function and so your fat utilization is going to be done in mitochondria. And so that's why things like the SS31 is a great option to stack as well. But again, not everybody needs all these peptides. So for instance, even the 5-amino, if you're one of those people who, utilizes fat pretty well, can, just tweak their diet a little bit and they lose the fat, this is probably not one that you're going to need. I'm not saying it's going to hurt you, but you don't need to spend the money on this one. You can utilize that money, that resource somewhere else. But if you're one of those guys who does all the things right, and even does the intermittent fasting, and you're just not pulling the fat off like you want to, this could be a really nice addition to what you're trying to do to kind of get you more moving down the road. And remember, this is one of those big issues. Not everybody's chemistry is the same. And so one person can do a diet and do an exercise and lose all the fat and gain all the muscle and everything's great. Some people need added testosterone to get their chemistry where it needs to be. Some people need really, really strict diets. Some people need GLP-1s and GLP-3s. Some people need GLP-3s, testosterone, the 5-amino, they need a bunch of stuff. And so it's just, what are we doing with your chemistry? What does your body specifically need? Not everyone's body is the same. And so the idea that this person's doing it this way and you have to do it a different way, or the way this person did it didn't work for you, doesn't mean that you're not dedicated, doesn't mean you're not doing the program, doesn't mean you're not working hard. It could mean that your chemistry is just different than the other person's, and so you need to step it up and do something a little different. Now, it could also totally mean that you're not doing the process the way you're supposed to, because that's the thing. So, but that's going to be one of those big things that everybody kind of needs to kind of figure out is what's the best for them. And working with somebody who's going to take your blood and look at things like that is really important, because especially if you're like a diabetic, when we're looking at these things, you've got to look at what your fasting insulin is and what these peptides are doing to your fasting insulin. Where are your blood sugars? Because again, this helps your body utilize energy at a much higher rate. So if you're a diabetic and you're on specific medications that are holding you in a specific spot, then you add in a peptide that will affect this, all of a sudden now you're low blood sugar. And so you've got to make sure that you're playing the game properly. And so one of the things you can do on that one is, again, work with someone who knows what they're doing, but get your fasting insulin pulled, figure out kind of where you are, because that'll help kind of dictate how things are going to move. One of the bigger things that we use, especially with the GLP-3s on diabetics, is we watch that fasting insulin. So I've got a patient who his fasting insulin was 30, And 3 months in, his fasting insulin was about 19. And he was like, I've only lost a little bit of weight, this and that. And he was like, so am I on the right path? And I was like, oh, absolutely. Like, you're crushing it, because the insulin resistance that you have, we've cut in half in 3 months, which is a massive thing. He's been diabetic for 20 years. And so that's a big deal. And so, had we not been watching the fasting insulin after 3 months and only losing a little bit, we would have been like, I don't know, we got to do something else. However, because we're watching it, that made all the difference in the world for his stuff. So if you're not getting your blood pulled, get your blood pulled. And this is more or less hormone therapy. So recognize we've got to check your hormones. If you're not pulling your fasting insulin, you're messing up. You need to get your fasting insulin pulled for any type of metabolic work, anything you're doing with any GLP-1s, GLP-3s, the 5-amino, anything you're doing to affect fat loss, you need to pull your fasting insulin so we see where insulin resistance levels are. So if you're not doing that, you definitely need to start working on that. Testosterone is also going to be a player. D3 is going to be a player. So getting those things where they're supposed to be is super important. So yeah, I don't know anybody in New York who's doing anything with peptides. A lot of guys can do some of this stuff telemed. They can definitely do the information stuff telemed and help you guys get it done that way. Some of this stuff, especially when we're working with pharmacies, sometimes it's hard to get stuff shipped into New York or California. Sorry, but that's just kind of where it is. But that would be some of those things. So if you guys have any other questions, drop them in the comments, or we'll get it later. But make sure that you guys, if you start doing this stuff, you start finding somebody who knows what they're doing and work with them. Because after about a month, 6 weeks, you'll have everything figured out and you can go do it on your own. But I would walk through this with a guide. So if you guys have any other questions, drop them in the comments and we'll get going. Thanks. Have a fantastic day.